The boardroom erupted in applause. I watched from my chair as my boss, Harrison Price, held up the slide like he'd just invented oxygen. His smile was so wide you could see his teeth from the back row. "This is the strategy that saved the company," he announced, turning slowly to make sure everyone saw him holding it. My hands gripped the chair arms so hard my nails dug into the leather. My throat tightened. Every single face in that room turned to look at him with admiration. Nobody looked at me. Nobody even seemed to remember I existed. I felt my pulse spike, felt my vision tunnel down to just him and that slide. That slide that I had created. That slide that represented 3 years of my life. 3 years of late nights. 3 years of weekends. 3 years of building something from nothing while he attended golf meetings and took long lunches. And he was standing there, taking the credit like he'd earned it. Like he'd spent 3 years perfecting the strategy. Like he'd lost sleep over the details. Like he'd done any of the work. I sat there trying to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was exploding. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm an analyst at Vertex Solutions. Or I was. I still am, technically. But in that moment, watching Harrison Price take credit for my entire career, everything changed. Not because I was going to quit. Not because I was going to make a scene. But because I finally understood what I had to do. I left the boardroom moving slowly, breathing deliberately. I made sure my face was calm. I made sure nobody could see what was happening inside me. Harrison caught up with me in the hallway. He put his hand on my shoulder. That casual, patronizing hand that made me want to scream. "Great work on compiling this, Natalie," he said. Compiling. Like I'd just organized someone else's PowerPoint. Like I'd been a secretary taking notes while he had the real ideas. I forced a smile. A real one, the kind that didn't show teeth. "Thanks, Harrison," I said, keeping my voice level. He squeezed my shoulder one more time, that satisfied squeeze that said he believed his own lie. Then he walked away, probably heading to the executive lounge to celebrate. I stood there in the hallway watching him go. My heart was hammering so hard I thought people might hear it. My hands were shaking. I walked back to my office and locked the door. That's when I let myself feel it. I paced back and forth, not pacing really, more like I was trapped in a box and trying to escape. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march back into that boardroom and tell everyone the truth. I wanted to grab that slide out of his hands and throw it across the room. But I didn't. Because screaming wouldn't help. Confrontation wouldn't help. Harrison thrived on control and drama. He'd spin whatever I said into proof that I was unstable. That I was ungrateful. That I was just trying to cause trouble. I had to be smarter than that. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that got cold and never touched my lips. I opened the folder I'd been maintaining for 3 years. The folder I called 3-Year Project Archives. Every draft was in there. Every single version of the strategy, from the first rough concept to the final presentation. Every email. Every timestamp. Every revision request I'd made. Every piece of feedback I'd incorporated. Every decision I'd documented. Every conversation I'd had with Harrison about what was working and what wasn't. I opened the first email. It was dated 3 years earlier. The subject line read, "Strategy Framework Initial Concept." It was from me to Harrison. I'd attached a rough outline. 20 pages. The framework for everything that would come after. I scrolled through my sent folder. Hundreds of emails. Thousands of hours of work documented in real time. Every decision point. Every problem I'd solved. Every time I'd pivoted when something wasn't working. Every breakthrough moment. It was all there. all the evidence I would ever need to prove that this was my work. That I had created this strategy from nothing. That Harrison Price had done nothing but watch me work and then step in front of the camera at the last moment. I realized something important that night. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be dramatic. It wouldn't be a confrontation or a scene or any of the things people expected. My revenge would be precise. It would be undeniable. It would be built on truth and documentation and facts that no one could argue with. I thought back to 3 years earlier. I'd been sitting in a small cubicle, barely big enough for a desk and a chair. This was before I was an analyst. This was when I was just starting out, trying to prove myself in a company that didn't really care if I succeeded or failed. I'd been assigned to work on a failing project. A strategy that wasn't working. The company was losing money. The board was frustrated. And they'd given the project to Harrison Price to fix it. But really, they'd given it to me. Harrison had delegated it immediately. He'd said something like, "Work on this. See if you can turn it around." And then he'd disappeared. I remembered those first weeks. I'd spent night after night going through data. Looking at market trends. Analyzing what wasn't working. I'd gone through thousands of data points. I'd tested theories. I'd thrown out approaches that weren't working and tried new ones. I'd stayed in that office until midnight most nights. I'd worked entire weekends. I'd turned down dates and dinners and friend events because I was obsessed with solving this problem. And eventually, I had solved it. I'd created a strategy that transformed the company. That took their failing approach and turned it into a profit-generating machine. That made them millions of dollars. And the only reason I did it was because I believed in the work. I believed in solving the problem. I believed in building something that mattered. And I believed in Harrison Price. I thought he was a good leader. I thought he cared about his team. I thought when the project succeeded, he would acknowledge the people who did the work. I was so stupid. The first person I reached out to was Lydia Chin. She was a board member. Quiet. Observant. The kind of person who noticed things when everyone else was too busy talking about their own opinions. I'd worked with her on a previous project. She'd always been fair. She'd always asked good questions. And most importantly, she always listened when I talked. I sent her an email. Casual. Just asking if she had time for coffee. We met at a small cafe near the office. I didn't come in aggressively. I didn't start by accusing Harrison of theft. I just mentioned, casually, how involved I'd been in the strategy work. I showed her a few of the earlier framework documents. I explained some of the decisions I'd made. The problems I'd encountered and how I'd solved them. I didn't say Harrison took credit for my work. I just asked, "What do you think the original vision looked like?" She listened carefully. She asked thoughtful questions. And when I left that cafe, I could see something had shifted in her mind. She was starting to wonder. She was starting to think about the question of who actually did the work. That was exactly what I needed. I spent that entire weekend organizing my evidence. Not for court. Not for a lawsuit. But for truth. I created a folder that was organized so perfectly that it could survive forensic scrutiny. I arranged everything chronologically. Every email. Every document. Every version of the project. I created timelines that showed the progression of the strategy from my initial concept through every revision I had made. I made notes on each document explaining the context. Why I'd made certain decisions. What problems I was solving. What tests I'd run. What results I'd gotten. I didn't make it dramatic or accusatory. I just presented the facts. The timeline. The progression. The evidence of 3 years of work, documented in real time. I printed some of it. I backed it up on a flash drive. I saved copies to my personal email. I made sure that no matter what happened, this evidence would survive. Because I understood something fundamental. This wasn't about my feelings. This wasn't about being angry or feeling betrayed. This was about truth. And truth, when documented properly, was unbeatable. Monday morning came. I showed up to work like nothing had happened. Harrison had organized a team stand-up meeting. He was talking about the success of the strategy. How it was working even better than expected. How the client was so impressed they wanted to expand the scope. He was in a good mood. He was loose and happy, basking in the compliments everyone was giving him. I sat there listening, watching him perform. And I smiled politely. I made eye contact with the team members sitting next to me. Every time someone mentioned how great the strategy was, I nodded like I was agreeing. Every nod. Every acknowledgement from a colleague. Every good job, Natalie, that people threw in my direction. It all reminded me of something. It reminded me that people knew I existed. People knew I worked hard. People might not have known that I created the strategy, but they knew that I was involved. And that awareness would matter when the time came. Over the next few days, I started dropping hints. Nothing obvious. Just carefully worded suggestions. In a meeting about the strategy's next phase, I said, we could review the source emails to see the original thinking. Harrison laughed it off. Made a joke about not needing to look backwards. But I saw Lydia raise her eyebrow. Just slightly. Just enough. Doubt was spreading. I wasn't pushing hard. I was just planting seeds. Gentle suggestions that maybe it would be good to understand the full history of the project. Maybe to look at how it had evolved. The thing about doubt is that once you plant it, it grows on its own. You don't have to water it. You don't have to nurture it. You just have to let it exist in someone's mind, and it will grow. Another meeting happened. This time with some of the investor group. Harrison presented the strategy again. This time he was more polished. More confident. He added some flourishes to his presentation. He talked about the team's effort, but it was clear who he thought the team was. Him. When he mentioned challenges the strategy had overcome, he took credit for solving them. When he mentioned innovative approaches, he took credit for innovating. And when someone asked, what was your inspiration for this approach, he paused, and I could see him deciding whether to mention me. He decided not to. He said it came from his experience in the industry. From his understanding of market dynamics. From his instinct. I sat there taking notes. Not upset notes. Professional notes. Notes that I was analyzing. Notes that said, this is what he just said. This is how he's positioning himself. Every word he spoke was adding to something. To proof. To documentation of his behavior. Every lie he told was being witnessed by people who would later have to reconcile those lies with the truth I was going to show them. That night, I sat in my apartment and let myself think about everything. I replayed every moment when Harrison had taken credit that wasn't his. Every time he'd dismissed my contributions. Every time he'd smiled that satisfied smile like he'd done something he hadn't done. I felt the anger rising. I let it. I let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal. Not because I was going to act on it emotionally, but because I needed to fuel my strategy. Anger without action is just frustration. But anger channeled into a methodical plan? That's power. I reminded myself of something important. Measured. Controlled. Methodical. This wasn't about drama. This wasn't about him feeling ashamed in front of people. This was about truth. and truth was going to destroy him far more effectively than any confrontation ever could. 3 days after the investor presentation, Harrison asked me to update the report. The strategy report. The document that showed how the approach was being implemented. How it was working in real markets. What results it was generating. I gave him exactly what he asked for. No more. No less. No extra insight. No additional analysis. No recommendations for how to improve it. Just the update he'd requested. That was all. He looked frustrated when I handed it to him. He started asking questions. Don't you think we should try this approach? Have you considered this angle? What if we modified the strategy like this? I told him I was just doing what he'd asked. If he wanted more analysis, he could ask for it. A colleague who was sitting nearby whispered to me later. He looked frustrated. Yes. He did. Because without me actively suggesting improvements, the strategy stopped improving. Without my constant innovation and problem solving, he was left with a static document. And he didn't know how to make it better because he didn't understand how it had been created in the first place. I scheduled another coffee with Lydia. This time, I was more direct. Not accusatory. But more direct. I told her about the original framework. About how the strategy had evolved over 3 years. About the specific problems I'd solved. About the different approaches I'd tested. I framed it as helping understand the project's history. But what I was really doing was giving her the tools to understand the truth. She listened. She asked follow-up questions. Good ones. Questions that showed she was starting to understand the scope of the work. The complexity. The years of development. By the end of the conversation, her perspective had shifted. I could see it. She was starting to realize that this 3-year project wasn't something someone created in a few weeks. It was something that had been developed methodically over years. And Harrison hadn't been involved in those years. He'd been somewhere else. Probably golfing. Probably having long lunches. Probably telling people about his strategic vision while someone else did the actual work. The office started to change. Subtly. Whispers. I'd walk past people having conversations and catch fragments. Didn't Natalie lead this? I thought she was working on the strategy the whole time. Wasn't that her original idea? Harrison stiffened when he heard them. I could see it. The tension in his shoulders. The way his jaw clenched. He was starting to understand that something was happening. That people were starting to question the narrative he'd created. That doubt was spreading through the office like water finding cracks. And he had no idea how it started. I applied for a position at a competing company. Not immediately. Not in a panic. But I started the process. I had an interview. I talked about my vision. About my approach to strategy. About the work I'd done. They were impressed. Very impressed. They wanted to hire me. They wanted me to lead their strategy division. But I didn't accept immediately. I told them I needed time to think about it. What I was really doing was creating options. I was positioning myself to eventually take the client network with me. I wasn't rushing this. I wasn't acting out of emotion. I was creating leverage. I was preparing an exit strategy that would make Harrison understand exactly what he would lose if I left. And the company would understand what they would lose. I was setting pieces on a chessboard. And I had all the time in the world. One of the clients I'd worked with privately mentioned something in a casual conversation. Your insights really saved us, she said. When you suggested that approach, it changed everything for our team. Harrison tried to take credit immediately. He said, I'm glad our strategic thinking helped you. But the client corrected him. She said, no, I meant Natalie's insights. And then she repeated my name. Just like that. Another small crack in his armor. Not a big crack. Just a small one. But cracks add up. They spread. They become fractures. And eventually, fractures become breaks. I sent a casual email to Lydia. Innocuous. Just a reference to some project drafts I'd found. Nothing incriminating. Nothing accusatory. Just a reminder that the original work existed. That there was documentation of the initial concept. Of how the strategy had evolved. Her response came back within an hour. Interesting. Let's discuss in private. The trap was set. She was ready. She was prepared to see what I had. And when she saw it, she would understand the full scope of what had happened. Harrison sensed tension. I could see it in the way he moved. The way he spoke. Like he knew something was wrong but couldn't pinpoint what. He tried to reassert control. He called more meetings. He made bigger presentations. He talked louder about his vision. But all of it just made him seem more desperate. More like someone trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. I maintained perfect composure through all of it. Showing loyalty outwardly. Agreeing with him in meetings. Supporting his decisions. While internally, I was counting the hours until the reveal. While internally, I was organizing the final pieces. Making sure everything was perfect. Making sure that when I showed the evidence, it would be undeniable. One meeting, he presented the strategy again. But this time, he was shakier. Slightly less confident. I could see it. The doubt was getting to him. Someone asked about the version control on the documents. About whether they had the initial drafts. I asked the question casually. Do we have the original drafts? I said, like I was just curious. His laughter felt forced. Really forced. Like it was coming from someone trying to pretend everything was fine when everything was falling apart. The room picked up on it. I could see people exchanging glances. Doubt was now visible to everyone. Not proven. Not documented. Just visible. Just the sense that something didn't add up about his story. I pulled two senior managers aside separately. Not together. Separately, so it didn't look like I was organizing some kind of conspiracy. I shared carefully framed hints about my evidence. I didn't say Harrison had done anything wrong. I just asked them questions. Do you remember when I started working on the strategy? Do you remember how long it took to develop? Do you remember who was in the meetings when we were building the framework? Both of them expressed private concern. Both of them started to think about the timeline. Started to realize that Harrison hadn't been involved in most of the development. My influence grew quietly. Invisibly. But effectively. A major client that I'd worked with started requesting me specifically. Not the team. Not the company. Me. They'd call and ask for me. They'd say they wanted to talk to the person who really understood their needs. Harrison's anxiety flickered across his face when he realized he was losing control of the relationships. When he understood that the client didn't just want the strategy, they wanted the person who'd created it. They wanted me. That was the moment he truly understood that he was losing something. That this wasn't just about credit anymore. This was about leverage. This was about whether he could even do his job without me. 2 weeks after the stolen credit. That's when I decided it was time. I sent an email to Lydia, ready to review the full email archive. She responded immediately. Within minutes. Board meeting tomorrow. Everything was aligned. The evidence was organized. The doubt had spread. The board members had been prepped. The timing was perfect. And I was ready. In the boardroom, I opened my laptop. I projected the emails. The first email. Dated 3 years earlier. The subject, Strategy Framework Initial Concept. My email. To Harrison. Attached, 20 pages. The framework for everything that came after. I went through the emails chronologically. Every decision point. Every problem I'd solved. Every revision I'd made. Every idea I'd tested. Every breakthrough. The room was silent. The kind of silence that happens when people are confronting something they don't want to be true, but can't deny. Harrison's face went pale. His hands started shaking. He tried to say something. He tried to explain. He tried to lie. He said, "These are just notes." I guided her thinking. But the emails proved otherwise. The emails showed me proposing solutions. Him asking questions. Me solving the problems. Him watching. The room didn't listen to his explanations. Because the emails told the real story. The silence was deafening. His credibility crumbled under documented truth. The investors leaned back in their chairs. They looked at each other. They looked at Harrison. They looked at me. One of them said, "We need to understand this fully." Contracts were frozen. A full audit was ordered. The board convened an emergency action plan. Harrison's position became untenable. He was losing everything in real time. Not because I was dramatic. Not because I was angry. But because truth had been documented so thoroughly that no one could deny it. And truth, once revealed, spreads like fire. It can't be controlled. It can't be spun. It just is. I walked out of the meeting with complete composure. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just walked out. And within an hour, the client I'd cultivated for months called. "We want to continue under your leadership," they said. The client understood who had actually done the work. My network. My intelligence. My composure. Had reversed every loss. Had proven what I already knew. That competence, when documented and presented properly, is unbeatable. That truth, when supported by evidence, destroys lies. That patience and strategy work far better than anger and confrontation. Harrison resigned quietly 3 days later. No drama. No confrontation with the board. Just a resignation letter and an exit interview with HR. The whispers followed him as he packed his desk. People in the elevator. People in the hallway. People who now understood what had really happened. That he'd stolen 3 years of someone else's work and tried to claim it as his own. And that he'd been caught. I accepted a promotion the same day. Lead analyst. Full authority over the strategy division. I walked into my new office, bigger than the old cubicle, with windows that looked out over the city. And I realized something important. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's not about confrontation or drama or any of the things people expect. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply being smarter. Being prepared. Being unshakable. Letting the truth speak for itself. Standing in that new office, I understood that I hadn't destroyed Harrison Price. He'd destroyed himself. I'd just documented it. Kindly like, share, and subscribe for more intriguing stories. The end.